The crowd is gathered outside of the great church of Stockholm, eager to welcome their new monarch. They've been waiting for a long time for the child of the previous king to be crowned. The throne has been without a ruling monarch since the king died 13 years ago, and today is the day when his offspring will continue in his footsteps. When the gates to the church opens up, the crowd starts cheering so loud that they can be heard from a mile away. The whole royal entourage is exiting the church, with the new monarch first off in the lead. A woman in the crowd leans into her husband, almost yelling for him to be able to hear her. "Doesn't she look just like him? Like the dead king," she says about their new monarch. "She is the spitting image of her father," the husband replies. The crowd is awaiting the herald to make the announcement. He's standing on a height in front of the massive crowd, and then he exclaims, "Long live the king, Her Majesty King Kristina I of Sweden." The crowd answers back, "Long live the king! Long live the king! Long live the king!" This is the amazing story of how a princess became a king, but also the story about her pursuit for freedom. Chapter 1: The father of the Princess King. Gustav II became king when he was 17 years old in the year 1611, and he would rule Sweden for 21 years. When he inherited the throne, Sweden was one of the poorest countries in Europe and had one of the weakest armies. But during the 21 years he was king, Sweden would enter a period of being a great power empire, being one of the greatest nations of Europe that had one of the most powerful, well-trained, and feared armies. He was also known as the Lion from the North because of the wars he fought against Catholicism. When he was 26 years old, he married a German princess, Maria Eleonora of Brandenburg. During the first years of their marriage, she would give birth to 3 children, and sadly none of them would survive infancy. So now, in December of 1626, when she goes into labor with their 4th child, Kristina, the king doesn't give a damn if it's a boy or a girl. He just wants a child. He's waiting in his part of the castle, pacing back and forth, nervous, excited, and scared, when the doors finally opens up and his sister, Princess Katarina, enters with the child in her arms, and she tells him that it's a girl. He moves quickly towards her and takes his child in his arms and says, "Let us thank God, my sister. I hope this girl will be as good to me as a boy." The mother's response to Kristina being a girl was not as affectionate and happy as the one of the king. The king brought Kristina with him wherever he went. He spent a lot of time with her and was very proud and pleased with the strong character she showed at a very young age. His goal was to raise her as a boy. It is said that when he had to leave when she was only 3 years old to go and finish off a 30-year-long war in Germany, that he hugged her and cried and had a very hard time letting go of her. Maybe he could sense that this would be the last time he would see her, and that when he leaves, he will never come back to her. Gustav was the kind of king that didn't fear wars. Even though he built a powerful army, he never expected his soldiers to go out there and do his dirty work for him. No, he was on the battlefield with them, fighting shoulder to shoulder with his soldiers. And this is how he would die. He was surrounded by a strong group of soldiers, but that day, on the 16th of November 1632, in Lützen, Germany, the fog was thick, and he got away from his group. Soldiers from the enemy camp found him and killed him. The King of Sweden is now dead, and Kristina is only 6 years old. While in war in Germany, 2 years before his death, Gustav the King would do something that would shape Kristina's life forever. He writes a letter to his right-hand man, a politician that was his closest man and that had helped him build Sweden to this power empire to be reckoned with, named Axel Oxenstierna. In this letter, he makes sure that Oxenstierna will know exactly what his wishes are in case he passes away. He specifically writes about his daughter, that he wants her to inherit everything from him, his wealth, his castles, his throne, and his title. He wants Kristina to become king. And he also writes that there is no one he trusts more to take care of Kristina and to keep the throne safe and secure for her than Oxenstierna. At this time, Axel Oxenstierna is one of the most respected and successful politicians in all of Europe, and he is also part of the National Council in Sweden. This letter would be the king's testament. Let's just pause for a moment to find out how it is possible for the king to decide that his daughter not only will inherit the throne, but also the title king. The answer is quite simple. By this time, there was no definite law of succession in Sweden, meaning that anyone could fight anyone for the right to the throne. But still, this wasn't quite the reality of the monarchs, because there was something else that had a lot of power to it and a lot of influence, and that was a certain lineage, called the lineage of Vasa, that had been on the throne since 1523, so about 100 years when Kristina was born. Kristina was a descendant of Vasa. It was this lineage that was Kristina's leverage, of course aside the fact that she was also the king's child. Another small side note here is that she wasn't his only child. He had a son out of wedlock a long time before he even got married. He even named his son after himself, Gustav Gustafsson, meaning Gustav, the son of Gustav. And later on, Kristina would give her brother the title of a count. But now, let's get back to Stockholm, Sweden. As I said, the king is dead. Kristina is 6 years old. And a month after his demise, the news arrives to the court that the king is dead. And there is a certain letter in the hands of the now most powerful man in Sweden, Axel Oxenstierna. The fate of Kristina, just as the letter, is in his hands. Chapter 2. The Creation of a King. When the corpse of the king finally arrives to Stockholm after about 6 months, the queen locks herself in her bedroom with her daughter and the corpse of her dead husband. The grief is taking its toll on her, to say the least. Maria Eleonora loved her husband and was madly in love with him when they married. Every time he went away to fight in a war, she would become sick of sadness and worry that something would happen to him. Once, she refused to let him leave for a war, and he obliged to her. All the other times, she used to travel to him, to the location where he was, even if it was dangerous for her. Actually, when he died, she had just visited him, and she was still in Germany when she was given the news that he had died. Just 3 days before his death, she wrote in a letter, "Nothing is more important to me than to be with His Majesty for as long as I live. Without him, nothing is important for me, not even my own life." Kristina barely knows her mother. She is almost 7 years old and has spent the last 15 months living with her aunt, the king's sister, Princess Katarina. And now she is locked inside her mother's bedroom with a mother that is grief-stricken and with the coffin containing her father's remains. The queen is refusing to let anyone take the coffin to bury it. Her plan is to die and to be buried with him. Only then can they have the coffin. The National Council, together with Axel Oxenstierna, had to force her to open the bedroom door and let them take the coffin to bury it. It is after this incident that Axel Oxenstierna steps forward to show who he is and what he's planning to do. He gathers the National Council, who really just consisted of the high nobility, and he makes a clear statement about the fate of the crown and the throne and how both of them belongs to Kristina. There are many potential suitors to the crown, and Oxenstierna vows to fight them off and to protect the crown until it is on Kristina's head. He also makes another decision. Because of her age, the National Council decides to create a guardian government to govern both Kristina and the crown until she is old enough to take care of both. Her upbringing becomes a matter of national interest. And in this guardian government, Oxenstierna chooses to exclude her mother. This means that her mother is no longer the guardian of Kristina and will have no say whatsoever in her life. Oxenstierna makes the decision for Kristina to have her aunt as a guardian and to live with her and her family, and she would grow up with her cousin Karl. If you blink, you might miss this detail. Remember her cousin Karl. He will enter the story in a grand way when Kristina is an adult. Because of the recent events that took place with her mother and the king's coffin, Oxenstierna decides that Maria Eleonora is not suitable as a mother. At barely 7 years old, Kristina has lost both her parents. She would barely ever see her mother, and when she's 13 years old, her mother would move back to Germany. And it is now that Axel Oxenstierna steps in as the most important person in her life. He will become her mentor, her teacher, and the strongest father figure for her. The meaning of his life will now be to make sure that Kristina will be the king her father dreamed of. The meaning of his life is now to honor the dead king's last wish. He makes sure to give her the best education possible at that time. The bishop teaches her languages, philosophy, and theology. She would become fluent in 8 languages, with French being her favorite one that she would use on a daily basis. As a child, she had to learn how to receive foreign envoys. At 12 years old, Axel Oxenstierna stepped in as her teacher in state affairs. She would write in her diary that there was nothing, no game nor fun, she wouldn't immediately drop to go to his classes and listen to his words. At 14, she was regularly briefed on government affairs, and at 16, she attended every official meeting the National Council had. Axel Oxenstierna raised her as a boy to become a king, just like her father wanted. She was trained in what was considered male sports like hunting and riding. She was taught mathematics and astronomy and was known for being intelligent and a quick learner. Her big idols were Alexander the Great, Cyrus the Great, and of course her father, the Lion. Axel Oxenstierna would proclaim in front of the National Council, as a man of his time, that Kristina was above both her sex and her age. They were very close, and Axel Oxenstierna was proud of the molding he had taken part of and supervised in the making of Sweden's next king. The National Council is now preparing for her 18th birthday, the day she will become an adult and therefore also the new king of Sweden. Kristina is also preparing herself for the very same thing, but not in the same way. She knows the way she wants to rule and how she wants to show her power. But she also knows that no matter her achievements, no matter her good reputation, no matter her royal lineage, there is one thing she has to do if she wants to be respected the way the people would respect a male king. She has her eyes set on her mentor, Axel Oxenstierna, and she knows exactly what she has to do. Chapter 3. Checkmate. The 7th of December, one day before her 18th birthday, one day before she will become king. She is standing in front of the elite in Sweden, the National Council and Axel Oxenstierna. The first thing she is expected to do is to sign the form of government that states how Sweden will be ruled, and it is authored mainly by Axel Oxenstierna. Everyone has their eyes on this girl they've watched grow up. Can they see the adult she's become? Can they see traces of the king she will become? Oxenstierna puts the documents in front of her. She doesn't glance at them even once. She's looking Oxenstierna in the eyes and not allowing him to break the eye contact. He offers her a pen that she doesn't look at. She's just staring at him. Ever since her father died and the Guardian government was formed, it has been Oxenstierna that has unofficially ruled Sweden. So now, she makes her first move against him, her mentor and friend. She stands up and walks away. A defiant move to show the elite who really is in charge, to show them that she is capable of making her own decisions and that she is also capable of refusing to rule Sweden the way Oxenstierna has decided. Experts have looked into this, and nothing shows that she chose to rule Sweden in any other way than what was defined in that form. So this was simply a power move to show the elite that she's not a pawn. She's not a puppet, and he the master that controls her. But more than anything, she wants to make sure that he knows this, that he will be in no doubt that he has now lost the power he has had over both Sweden and her. To make sure that there is no way for him to misunderstand her, she immediately strikes him with her second move. Shortly after she ascends the throne, she sends Oxenstierna away from Stockholm, and more importantly, away from the court and away from the National Council. The official reason was that he had been given the mission to mediate between the state and a group of rebels in another part of Sweden that had started an uprising that seemed to be developing into a civil war. This mission will keep him away from the court for 6 months, making his presence weaker and weaker and her own presence only stronger. He, of course, comes back successful and has prevented a civil war in Sweden. Now she strikes him with her third move. Remember when I said that she looked up to Alexander the Great, Cyrus the Great, and her own father? There was another historical figure that she really admired, and that was Machiavelli, a philosopher, politician, and the author of the book The Prince. In this now world-famous book, he describes how a ruler can be the most successful in building a strong state. He gives his own analysis, advices, and strategies on this matter. Kristina would use one of his strategies to ultimately render Axel Oxenstierna harmless. When he returns to Stockholm, Kristina makes sure to celebrate him for his achievements, and to do so, she officially elevates his social status to Count. This is the highest position you can possibly have next to being the ruling monarch. According to Machiavelli, if you have someone in your midst that is very powerful and that is a threat to your power, you make sure to give him everything he wants and to elevate him to the highest position possible. In other words, make sure that he knows that if he would ever turn against you, he has everything to lose. Make no mistake, the reason why Kristina is even on the throne is solely thanks to Oxenstierna. But she has no plans to be as grateful as he is probably expecting her to be grateful enough to just sit on the throne, but let him be the true ruler. No, she has now put herself in the top of the political elite. She is now done with her 3 moves against her biggest rival. But she has one more move to make that will change her fate and the fate of Sweden. a move she is constantly reminded of ever since she ascended the throne. A move she understands is becoming more and more inevitable because of the biggest expectation people have on her now. She is a king, but she is also a woman. And she is now expected to marry and to give birth to an heir. Something she is simply refusing to do. Chapter 4. Checkmate means freedom. If you can make sure to only belong to yourself, why would you ever belong to someone else? This is a diary entry that Kristina wrote. When she became king, the National Council stated, quote, "Because Her Majesty is a king, she must be respected as a man," unquote. But Kristina knew this to not be true, to not be fully her reality. Even as king, if she would marry, according to the church, she would still be subordinate to her husband. Her husband wouldn't have the political power she does, but he would still have the ultimate power in their marriage. And that is how she knows that the true reality isn't that she's just a king. She is also a woman. This is something she time and time again in her diary would curse. Quite frankly, she hated the fact that she was born a woman and wrote in her diary that being a woman is the biggest defect of them all, and that it is a burden for her to be a female king. She also would say to the National Council in a meeting when they were discussing her future as a potential wife, quote, "My eyes are located too high up in my head for me to look up to any man," unquote. She didn't want to belong to a man through marriage or to a child through motherhood. 5 years after she ascended the throne, she officially let the National Council know this. The protocol from this meeting is still preserved and shows us the plan she had been working on for years. As a ruling monarch, it is her duty to make sure that there is an heir to the throne, and she will fulfill this duty, but not in the way everyone's expecting her to. The high nobility and the politicians in Sweden were perplexed by her ability to dismiss marriage offers. She got some pretty great ones, both from other European royal families, but also among the high nobility in Sweden. Earlier in the story, I told you to remember her cousin Carl, and it is now that he enters both her personal story, but also the greater historical story of Sweden. As I mentioned before, Kristina grew up with Carl in the same household, and Axel Oxenstierna actually supervised his upbringing and education as well. And according to Kristina's diary, she was in love with Carl as a teenager, and when she turned 18 and became the ruling monarch, Carl saw his chance to become the second most powerful person in Sweden, and he had in good memory that Kristina used to be infatuated with him. So he popped the question, and was very surprised when she turned him down. His dreams of securing his future and his political career was shattered. Or so he thought, because as fate would have it, Kristina had much bigger plans for him than he could ever have dreamt of for himself. She doesn't want him to become the second most powerful person. She wants him to become the heir to the throne. And this is how Carl becomes part of her grand plan towards freedom. She can't have everything she wants. She understands this. She has to choose. If she wants her father's inheritance, she has to give up her personal freedom, or gain her personal freedom and lose everything her father had given her. And apparently, this was an easy choice for her to make. She chose her freedom. The first step is to convince Carl to accept her offer of not marrying him, but making him her heir. And this actually showed itself to be more difficult than she thought, because he refused. Maybe he thought that this was some sly way for Kristina to test his loyalty, but he said no, over and over again. It took some time for her to gain his trust by confiding in him the reasons why she's refusing to marry and give birth to an heir. and that is why she wants him and his future offspring to inherit the throne. Eventually, he would accept her offer. The next step is to convince the National Council to approve of Karl as the next person in line to the throne. And they did not approve. They still hadn't given up on their hopes that she would eventually marry and give birth to an heir. She is now in a deadlock, but she still has one card up her sleeve. Because what no one knows, not even Karl, is that she's planning to abdicate. Her plan is not for Karl or his offspring to inherit the throne when she dies of old age or from a sickness. Her plan is for him to take over as soon as possible. To make sure that her plans will succeed, she has to force the National Council to accept Karl, and she knows exactly how to do this. During the following year, she would make certain state financial decisions that would make the high nobility stronger and richer, which would make the common man poorer and angrier. And at the same time, she encouraged the farmers, the workers, and the common man to get angry with the elite and to start putting demands on them. And this angry mob was invited by her to the meeting the National Council would have 1 year after she first proposed a new heir to the throne. The people were angry, demanding the high nobility to give back lands and fortune they considered to have been stolen from them. And the National Council felt threatened and saw in what direction this was heading. And they also knew this to be Kristina's creation. It was her way of telling them, either you give me what I want, or I will become your worst political nightmare. It is now, at this gathering of the National Council in the year 1650, that Karl was officially recognized as the heir to the throne. But she would still wait 1 more year before revealing her plan to abdicate. The 7th of August, 1651, Kristina is standing in front of every powerful person in Sweden and is asking them to let her be a commoner. She is asking of them to accept her abdication. To say that they refused is an understatement. But now they understood what she has been up to the last couple of years, and they begged her not to abandon the throne. For the first time, she is actually hesitating. Doubt builds up inside of her. Is she wrong in doing this? She doesn't give them a yes, but she also doesn't give them a no. She simply lets time pass to think about the biggest decision she will ever have to make. She thinks for 2 years and 6 months. Then, in February of 1654, when she is 28 years old, she gives them her ultimate decision. She is abdicating, and there is no use in them trying to convince her otherwise. The 6th of June, 1654, Kristina is sitting on her silver throne in Uppsala Castle, the same castle where her father was crowned. Her crown is on her head. It's the same one she chose to be crowned with when she became king. It's her father's crown. She's holding the scepter in one hand and the golden apple in the other. She steps down from the throne and hands the scepter and apple over to the National Council that is represented by Axel Oxenstierna. According to a chancellor's testimony, everyone in attendance was crying. She moves her hands to the crown and removes it herself from her head. She walks down the podium towards her cousin and offers him everything she is now leaving behind. He is now officially king and is crowned Carl Gustav X. You would think by now that the story of Kristina ends here, that she has no more cards up her sleeve and no more plans to execute, but you're highly mistaken. This same day, she leaves the country. She doesn't stay to participate in the coronation of her cousin. She changes her outfit and wears man clothing. She packs her stuff, has a couple of handmaids with her, and on horseback she crosses the borders to Denmark, and then continue riding south. She has already sent an envoy ahead of her to prepare for her and the next move she's about to make. You can't simply be a Protestant at this time and live in a non-Protestant country. She knows this. So when she arrives to the Netherlands, she converts to Catholicism. According to some experts, this is the decision she made that would have her father, a huge opponent to Catholicism, turning over in his grave, much more than her decision to abdicate. She would arrive to Rome and live the rest of her life there. A while after she left Sweden, Axel Oxenstierna died. He had kept his promise to the dead king and lived to see how Kristina broke hers. Maybe he died of a broken heart. That's at least what she speculates in her diary. With her abdication, the royal lineage of Vasa ends. But this isn't the only heritage she left behind. She also put it in writing in the law, forbidding daughters to inherit the throne. This law would be practiced for another 300 years in Sweden, meaning that only sons could become ruling monarchs. This wouldn't change until 1980. Her decision to abdicate remains a mystery. No one knows why. She could have chosen to stay unmarried and secure the throne by announcing Karl as her heir, but she didn't. She chose to leave. Her decision to convert to Catholicism is also unknown. She never gives a reason for these two decisions. She dies at the age of 63. These are her own words that might make us understand her decisions. Quote, "I was born free. I lived free, and I will die liberated." Unquote. Thank you for listening. I'll see you in the next story.